It was an early morning, and the city streets were still quiet, with only the distant hum of cars and the occasional chirp of birds in the air. For most people, it was just another regular day, but for one woman, this day held the weight of the world. As the sun slowly climbed higher in the sky, she stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her blouse and running her fingers through her hair. It was the moment she had been waiting for. The job interview. The chance to change everything got her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to steady herself. The job she was about to interview for wasn't just any job. It was the one that could secure her future, the one that could give her financial stability and a better life. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, polishing her resume, practicing her answers, and reading up on the company. Everything had to be perfect. This job wasn't just a career opportunity, it was a lifeline. But as she stood there, looking at her reflection, a wave of anxiety swept over her. She wasn't nervous because she doubted her abilities. No, it wasn't that. The real reason for her anxiety was that she wasn't going alone. She wasn't going by herself, like most people do when they head out for a job interview. She was going with her son. Her son, a playful and curious little boy, had been her world for the past few years. She had raised him on her own, doing the best she could to be both a mother and a provider. It wasn't easy. There were days when she felt completely overwhelmed, like she was juggling too many balls at once, and one of them was bound to drop. But she always found a way to keep going. To keep pushing forward, she glanced over at him now as he sat on the couch in their tiny living room. His small feet kicking back and forth, his face lit up with excitement. He had no idea what was going on. To him, this was just another day, another adventure. He had no idea that his mother's entire future depended on the success of this one interview, but the reality of her situation hit her again. The babysitter she had hired to watch him while she was gone had called in sick this morning. There was no backup plan, no family members she could rely on to help. She couldn't miss this opportunity. Not this time. She had considered rescheduling, but there was no guarantee they would be able to fit her in again. And the longer she waited, the more her chances of landing the job would slip away. She couldn't afford to lose it. Her son's future depended on her success. As she gathered her things, her resume, her portfolio, and the letter confirming the interview, the worry began to settle in her stomach. She glanced over at her son, who was now pretending to drive a toy car across the coffee table. His laughter was light and carefree, and for a moment, she allowed herself to smile. "Okay, kiddo, we've got this," she said softly, more to herself than to him. She grabbed her bag and stuffed her resume into it, determined to make this work. If she had to take him with her, then so be it. She couldn't let anything stand in her way. The city streets were starting to come alive as she and her son made their way to the bus stop. The air was crisp, and the hustle and bustle of the morning commute had begun. People hurried past, their faces buried in their phones, barely noticing the world around them. She, however, noticed everything, the look of a mother who was balancing 1,000 worries, who had learned to walk the line between hope and desperation. She held her son's hand tightly as they boarded the bus. The journey seemed longer than usual, as every bump and jolt reminded her that this wasn't how she had envisioned the day going. She had hoped for a smooth, quiet ride, one where she could focus on mentally preparing for the interview, but her son had other plans. "Mommy, look. There's a dog," he exclaimed, pointing out the window. She turned to look and smiled at his excitement. Despite the stress, she felt her heart warm. This little boy had a way of making everything feel lighter, even when the world seemed heavy. He was her reason for everything, and if that meant taking him to a job interview, she would do it without hesitation. When they arrived at the building, she could feel the nerves rising in her chest again. The sleek glass doors loomed ahead, and the elevator right up to the top floor seemed to take forever. She kept telling herself that everything would be fine. She would explain the situation to the interviewer and hope that they would understand. It wasn't ideal, but sometimes life didn't give you perfect circumstances. Sometimes you just had to make the best of what you had. The moment she stepped into the building's lobby, she was greeted by a receptionist with a polite smile, but there was something in the air, a quiet judgment that she could feel in her bones. She knew that people often viewed mothers with young children as less serious or professional. It wasn't fair, but it was reality. As she signed in for her interview, she could feel the eyes of the receptionist lingering on her son, who was now tugging at her sleeve, eager to see the colorful fish in the lobby aquarium. "Please have a seat," the receptionist said, her tone still polite but a little distant. "The interviewer will be with you shortly." Her son immediately spotted a toy car on the floor in the waiting area. Without a second thought, he ran over to it, his small feet making little pitter-patter sounds against the polished floor. She felt the eyes of others in the room shift toward her, the soft whispers of, "Is that her child? Can she really manage both a child and a job?" Swirling in the air, her cheeks flushed, and she quickly motioned for her son to sit down next to her. "Please, sweetie, stay close," she whispered, trying to keep him calm. But the toy car had caught his attention, and before she could stop him, he was on the floor again, pushing the car back and forth with pure joy. The sound of the car hitting the floor echoed in the otherwise silent room. She could feel the eyes of the others, and her heart sank. She hated feeling judged. She hated that her child was a distraction. She hated that she was being looked at like she was unprofessional, finally. After what felt like an eternity, her name was called. She stood up quickly, trying to gather her composure. She gently took her son's hand, pulling him along with her as she walked toward the interview room. Her nerves were at an all-time high, and the reality of what was about to happen started to sink in. She was walking into the unknown, her future hanging in the balance. Would they judge her because of her son? Would they see her as capable? Or would this be the moment everything fell apart? As the door closed behind her, she was filled with a sense of uncertainty, but she knew one thing: she couldn't turn back now. She was here, with her son in tow, and she was going to give it her all. The door to the interview room closed softly behind them, and for a moment everything felt still. Her heart was racing, her palms were sweating, and her mind was spinning with 1,000 thoughts. She glanced down at her son, who was now holding her hand tightly, his little eyes wide with curiosity. He had no idea what was going on, but he could sense that something important was happening. She gave him a reassuring smile, but inside, her nerves were getting the best of her. The interview room was quiet, but there was an almost palpable tension in the air. The interviewer, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, stood up as they entered. His smile was polite but distant, and he motioned for her to sit down. She hesitated for a second before guiding her son to a small chair beside her, trying to keep him calm as she adjusted her own seat. The room was sleek and professional, with a large wooden desk that separated them. She noticed the framed certifications and awards on the walls, reminding her just how much was at stake. This wasn't just another job interview, it was a chance to change everything for her and her son. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, but now that she was here, it felt like her nerves might get the better of her. Her son, however, seemed completely at ease. He had already spotted a shiny paperclip on the floor and was fascinated by it, as if it was the most exciting thing he had ever seen. She gave him a soft "she," hoping he wouldn't cause too much of a distraction. But it was too late. He had already started fiddling with the paperclip, tapping it against the floor with the kind of enthusiasm only a child could muster. The interviewer, who had been looking at her resume, looked up and offered a polite but unsure smile. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the little boy. She immediately felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. "Yes, I'm so sorry," she said quickly, trying to salvage the situation. "My babysitter canceled at the last minute. I hope this isn't too much of an inconvenience." The interviewer's smile faltered for a moment, and for a brief second she feared the worst. Would he think she was unprofessional? Would he judge her for not being able to make alternative arrangements? Would he decide that she wasn't serious enough for the job? She couldn't help but feel like she was already losing, but then, to her surprise, the interviewer softened. "No problem at all," he said, his voice warm but still professional. "We understand that these things happen. Please make yourself comfortable." She breathed a small sigh of relief, grateful that he wasn't immediately dismissing her. But the tension in the room still hung there like an invisible weight. She glanced over at her son, who had started making noises with the paperclip, his little giggles filling the silence. He was having the time of his life, unaware of the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. The interviewer, though polite, clearly seemed distracted by the noise. She could see him glancing at her son every few seconds, trying to remain focused but clearly unsure of how to proceed. She quickly placed her hand on her son's lap, hoping to quiet him down, but it didn't help. The more she tried to keep him still, the more he wriggled in his seat. Eager to explore the room, the interviewer cleared his throat, then looked at her with a kind but uncertain expression. "So, tell me a little bit about your experience in this field," he asked. Hoping to steer the conversation in a professional direction, she nodded, trying to gather her thoughts. This was the moment to prove that she was more than capable of handling this job. She had the experience. She had the skills. And most importantly, she was ready to take on new challenges. But as she began speaking, her son's voice suddenly rose above hers, a loud, unmistakable giggle echoing through the room. She froze for a second, her words catching in her throat. She could feel her heart skip a beat as the interviewer's eyes flicked toward her son, then back to her. His smile had faded slightly, and his posture was now more rigid. She could tell that he was trying to be polite, but it was clear that the situation was uncomfortable for him. She felt a wave of self-doubt wash over her. Would her son's behavior ruin everything? Trying to regain her composure, she quickly continued with her answer. "I've worked in this industry for several years," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "I've handled a variety of projects from—" She trailed off, unsure of how to continue. Her son's giggles seemed to fill the space, louder than ever, making it hard for her to focus. The interviewer cleared his throat again, looking down at his notepad. "Right," he said, his voice soft. "That's great. I'm sure you have a lot of experience." He didn't sound convinced, though, and she could feel the gap growing between them. She knew that his patience was running thin and the pressure was mounting. She had to do something, anything to salvage this interview. In an effort to keep the situation from escalating, she turned to her son, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetie, can you please sit still for a little while? Mommy is talking." She hoped he would listen, but instead he let out a loud, excited shriek. His small hands reaching for the toy car he had spotted earlier, the interviewer looked visibly uncomfortable now. His lips pressed together as he tried to maintain his professional demeanor. She could see the faint flicker of frustration in his eyes, and her stomach dropped. She had tried so hard to make a good impression, but now it felt like everything was slipping away. "Maybe I can just reschedule the interview," she suggested, her voice faltering slightly. "I can come back when I have childcare arrangements." But before she could finish her sentence, her son burst into another round of giggles, this time louder than ever. The sound was so genuine, so innocent, that for a split second it broke through the tension in the room. The interviewer paused, his expression softening as he turned to look at the little boy. There was something about that moment, the pure joy in her son's laughter, the unguarded innocence that children so often bring to the world, that seemed to shift the atmosphere. The interviewer didn't seem so stiff anymore. He looked at her differently, his gaze no longer filled with doubt but with a kind of curiosity. For a brief moment the room fell silent. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. The tension she had felt earlier began to ease, just a little bit. The interviewer, now visibly more relaxed, gave her a slight smile. "I have to admit," he said, his voice warmer now, "it's been a while since I've seen someone bring their child to an interview." She chuckled nervously, trying to hide her relief. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I didn't mean to make this awkward. It's just that I didn't have any other option today." The interviewer nodded, his smile widening. "No need to apologize. It's actually kind of refreshing," he said, as if something in her vulnerability had broken the ice. "It's clear you're juggling a lot, and that says a lot about your ability to handle pressure." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. Could this really be happening? Could her son's giggles, which had felt like the biggest obstacle moments ago, actually be helping her in some way? The room still felt tense, but it was different now. The interviewer seemed more understanding, less judgmental. It was as if the barrier had been broken, and they were no longer two people on opposite sides of a desk, but two human beings, each facing their own challenges. As her son continued to play, oblivious to the shifting dynamics around him, she felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the disaster she had feared. Maybe, with a little patience and a little luck, she could still make a good impression. The giggles continued. At first, she had been embarrassed by the sound of her son's laughter filling the room, but now it had become almost comforting. It wasn't just a distraction. It was a reminder that this moment, this interview, was still a small part of her larger life. It wasn't about just this job, it was about providing for him, giving him opportunities, and showing him that nothing would stand in the way of their future. Despite the growing sense of calm, the reality was still sinking in. She was in an interview and she had a child in tow. And no matter how friendly the interviewer had become, she knew there was still a lot riding on this conversation. The giggles, the shuffling sounds of her son playing with his toy car, all seemed to be taking center stage. Would the interviewer think she was too distracted? Would he see her as someone who couldn't manage both career and motherhood? She quickly tried to refocus her attention, shifting her posture and crossing her legs under the table. She knew she had to impress the interviewer with more than just her resume. She needed to show him that she was capable, that she could balance both work and motherhood with grace. She wasn't just a mother, she was a skilled, determined woman who had learned how to juggle it all. So, the interviewer began again, breaking the silence. You mentioned you've handled a variety of projects. Could you share a bit more about your experience with managing teams? She nodded, grateful for the shift in focus. This was her chance to talk about her work, to prove her worth. Her son's giggles were still there, but she was determined to power through them. Yes, she said, straightening her back. In my previous job, I was in charge of a small team. We handled everything from project planning to execution. I found that the key to success was creating a clear communication channel and ensuring everyone felt heard. When you have a group of people with different strengths and skills, it's important to make sure everyone knows their role and feels valued. I always encourage collaboration and problem solving. It helped the team stay motivated and work together, even under tight deadlines. As she spoke, she could see the interviewer's interest peaking. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes no longer focused solely on the resume in front of him. She felt her confidence growing. This was her element, the part where she could speak about something she knew inside and out. Her work ethic, her leadership skills, her ability to adapt to challenges. These were the qualities she had honed over the years, but just as she was beginning to feel like she was hitting her stride, her son's voice broke through again. "Mommy, look!" he exclaimed, holding up the toy car triumphantly. She froze for a moment. Her words had faltered, and she looked at the interviewer, whose face remained polite, but his smile was now a little more strained. She could see the awkwardness creeping back into the room. He was trying so hard to be understanding, but she could feel that it wasn't easy for him to remain completely focused on the conversation with a child in the room. Her son, oblivious to the situation, continued to roll his toy car on the floor, his little feet kicking excitedly as he followed it. The car bumped into the interviewer's chair, and for a split second, the room went silent. She immediately reached for the toy, but it was too late. The interviewer had already leaned back in his chair, clearing his throat. "Right," he said, the words sounding almost like an apology. He gave her a tight smile. "Let's get back to the topic. Managing teams, right?" She nodded, feeling her face flush again. It wasn't his fault, he wasn't being rude, but she couldn't help but feel like she had failed, like she couldn't even keep her child under control during an interview. Was this a sign that she wasn't cut out for the role? What if he thought she was unprofessional? "I'm sorry," she said quickly, trying to recover. "I'm sure you're wondering about the situation with my son. I understand if it's a bit distracting." To her surprise, the interviewer waved it off. No, it's fine," he said, his voice softer now. "It's just, well, it's unusual. But we've all been there, haven't we? Balancing work and family." She was caught off guard by his response. It wasn't dismissive at all. In fact, it was the most human thing he had said so far. She had expected him to become more frustrated, to steer the conversation away from her son completely, but instead, he seemed to acknowledge the reality that she was living in. It felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Even if only for a moment, she forced herself to smile, grateful for his understanding. "Yes," she said, the words coming out more easily now. "It's definitely a challenge, but it's something I've had to adapt to. I've learned how to multitask, how to be efficient, and how to prioritize what really matters. It's not always easy, but it's the only way to make everything work." The interviewer nodded, his expression softening further. "I can see that," he said, his tone more sincere. "It's clear that you've been managing a lot on your plate, and you're doing it with determination." Her heart swelled at his words. This wasn't what she had expected at all. She had braced herself for judgment, for skepticism, but instead, the interviewer seemed to be seeing her for what she truly was, someone who was doing her best in an imperfect situation. The atmosphere in the room shifted again, and this time it was for the better. She wasn't just another candidate sitting across from a hiring manager. She was a mother, yes, but she was also a woman who had built a career. A woman who had learned how to navigate the challenges of life with grace and resilience. As the interview continued, the conversation flowed more easily. Her son, despite his occasional giggles and distractions, seemed to bring an unexpected warmth to the room. His innocence was a reminder that life wasn't just about professional accomplishments and perfect resumes. It was about the people who mattered most, the ones we worked so hard for. And for her, that was her son. She began to feel like maybe, just maybe, this interview wasn't as much of a challenge as she had initially thought. She could do this. She could juggle both motherhood and her career. And perhaps the interviewer could see that too. As the interview came to a close, the interviewer stood up and extended his hand to her, a genuine smile on his face. "It's been a pleasure talking with you today," he said. "You're clearly a dedicated and hardworking person, and I think you would be a great fit for this role. We'll be in touch soon." She shook his hand, her heart soaring. She had done it. Against all odds, she had made it through the interview without letting the distractions of motherhood derail her chances. She had shown the interviewer who she was, not just a mother with a child, but a capable, determined woman ready to take on the world. As she walked out of the room, her son still clutching his toy car, she felt a sense of pride. The giggles, the interruptions, the challenges, none of it mattered in the end. What mattered was that she had made it through. And no matter what the outcome was, she knew she had already won in so many ways. As she left the interview room, she felt an odd mixture of exhaustion and relief. Her son, still happily playing with his toy car, had become more of a comfort than a burden. His innocent giggles had somehow made the atmosphere lighter, even in the most tense moments. She didn't know how it had happened, but the discomfort she had initially felt in the room had transformed into something else. It felt like the walls of professionalism, the ones she had feared would box her in, had come down just a little. She wasn't sure what had shifted in the interviewer's demeanor. At first, there had been a clear, almost clinical distance between them. He had asked the necessary questions, nodded at the right moments, but there had been an underlying sense of skepticism. The presence of her son, who was by no means behaving perfectly, had certainly been an obstacle. She had feared that her chances were slipping away as she scrambled to manage her child's noises and movements. But as the interview progressed, she began to notice subtle changes in the interviewer's tone. His responses became warmer, his questions more personal. And by the end, when he'd acknowledged her ability to juggle work and motherhood, she had sensed something she hadn't expected. Genuine respect. She couldn't help but replay the moment in her mind, when he had leaned forward just slightly, after her son had interrupted for the umpteenth time. Instead of pushing her aside, the interviewer had made eye contact with her and, in a more relaxed tone, said, "We've all been there, haven't we?" His words were not just a casual remark, but a reminder that people are more alike than they are different. Everyone, no matter their position, had moments in their life when they were balancing more than they could carry. It was in that moment that the tension she had felt began to lift. For the first time, it wasn't just about her being a mother who brought her child to an interview. It was about the shared human experience of juggling life's challenges. She couldn't quite believe how the interview had shifted. It had started off as a nerve-wracking ordeal, where every giggle and movement from her son seemed like it would derail everything. But now, as she stepped out of the room, she felt that something had changed. It was as though, in that room full of formality and expectations, she had given a glimpse into her real life. And, to her surprise, the interviewer had accepted it, not just tolerated it, but seemed to understand it in a way she hadn't expected. Her son tugged at her sleeve, snapping her out of her thoughts. She looked down at him, and his big, brown eyes were wide with wonder as he asked, "Mommy, when can we go home?" She smiled, bending down to ruffle his hair. "Soon, sweetheart. Mommy just has to finish here, okay?" She walked towards the elevator, feeling the weight of the experience settling in. She hadn't been perfect, far from it. But maybe, just maybe, perfection wasn't what mattered after all. It was the real, raw moments of life, the moments when things didn't go according to plan, that showed what a person was truly made of. And in those moments, she had given the interviewer a glimpse of who she really was. A mother doing her best, trying to make a life for her child while chasing her own dreams. As the elevator doors closed, she reflected on what had just happened. Her thoughts kept circling back to that moment when the interviewer had spoken with more warmth, when he had acknowledged the challenge of balancing work and family. She had expected him to judge her, to see her as someone unable to fully commit to her career, someone too distracted to focus on the job. But instead, he had seen her strength. He had seen her ability to handle the pressures of life and still move forward. That, she realized, was what had mattered most. The elevator ride felt too short as it reached the ground floor. As the doors opened, she took a deep breath and looked down at her son again. "All done, buddy. We can go home now," she said softly. He nodded, a small smile forming on his face as he clutched his toy car. "Can we go get ice cream?" he asked. She chuckled. "I think that sounds like a good idea." For the first time in hours, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had made it through. And no matter what happened next, she knew she had done her best. As she walked out of the building, the weight of the interview, the uncertainty, and the pressure began to lift. The sun was brighter now, and the street was busier than it had been earlier. It felt like the world had moved on while she had been caught in a whirlwind of anxiety and hope. Her son's giggles, which had once felt like a burden, now seemed like the soundtrack to her journey. They were a reminder that life wasn't just about the big moments, it was about the little ones too. The moments when everything seemed to fall apart, but then somehow you found a way to pull it all together. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her reverie. She pulled it out and saw a message from the interviewer. It was a short note, just a few words. She felt a surge of anticipation. What would it say? Had they decided to move forward with her? Or had they found someone else? With a trembling hand, she opened the message. "Thank you for your time today. I was impressed by your experience and dedication. We would love to offer you the position. Looking forward to working with you." Her breath caught in her throat. She had done it. She had really done it. Despite the challenges, despite the moments of uncertainty, she had landed the job. She felt a surge of triumph, a rush of relief, and a sense of accomplishment that was more powerful than any fear she had felt that morning. Her son looked up at her, sensing something had changed. "Mommy, did you get the job?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "Yes, sweetie, I did." He jumped up and down, his joy so pure, so unfiltered, that it made her heart swell. "Yay, you're the best, Mommy." And in that moment, standing there on the busy street with her son, she realized something important. This wasn't just her victory. It was theirs. Every challenge she faced, every obstacle she overcame, it was all worth it for this. To provide him with the best life possible. To show him that hard work, determination, and love could change everything. As she wrapped her arms around him and hugged him tightly, she thought about the journey ahead. There would be more challenges, more tough days. But for now, in this moment, she had achieved something she once thought was impossible. She had a new job, a new opportunity, and most importantly, she had the love and support of her son, and that she realized was all she truly needed. The next few days passed by in a blur of excitement and nerves. After receiving the message from the interviewer, she felt as if her world had shifted. The moment she read the words, "We would love to offer you the position," everything else faded into the background. The anxiety, the stress, the moments of doubt, it all melted away. She had done it. She had landed the job, but despite the wave of happiness, there was still a part of her that couldn't quite believe it. How could this be real? She had walked into that interview uncertain, unsure of how she would balance being a mother and a professional. There had been moments when she feared the interviewer wouldn't take her seriously, when her son's giggles and interruptions might have ruined everything. Yet, here she was, being offered the position of her dreams. She couldn't wait to tell her son. He had no idea what it meant to land a job, but he understood the significance of his mother's smile and the warmth in her voice. When she told him that she had gotten the job, he jumped up and down with excitement, his small hands clapping in the air as if he had won a prize. The sheer joy on his face made everything worth it. It was his happiness that fueled her, his belief in her that made her feel like she could accomplish anything. But even with the excitement of the offer, there were still the practicalities of her new job to think about. How would she manage the balance of work and family life? How would she navigate the challenges of being a single mother with a demanding new position? The reality of the situation began to sink in, and with it came a renewed sense of responsibility. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. She started her new job with all the energy and determination she had, but she quickly realized that the juggling act wasn't as simple as she had hoped. There were deadlines to meet, meetings to attend, and tasks to complete, things that required her full attention and focus. She was grateful for the opportunity, but at the same time she felt stretched thin. The pressure of balancing work and motherhood began to build in ways she hadn't anticipated. There were days when she felt completely exhausted. The demands of her new job often meant working late into the evening after her son had gone to bed. Some nights, when she crawled into bed herself, she felt like she had nothing left to give. But then, the next morning, she would wake up to the sound of her son's laughter, and it was as if all the weight of the world lifted off her shoulders. His giggles, once a source of distraction, had become a source of strength. They were a reminder that she was doing this for him. That every late night and early morning was worth it. She had to learn quickly how to balance her time, how to prioritize tasks, how to set boundaries, and how to ask for help when needed. She couldn't do everything on her own, and there was no shame in admitting that. At first, she was reluctant to ask for help, worried that it might make her seem weak or incapable. But she soon realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of strength. Whether it was relying on a trusted neighbor for childcare or reaching out to a coworker for support, she learned that it was okay to lean on others. It wasn't easy, but gradually she began to find her rhythm. She figured out a routine that worked for her and her son. She took the time to appreciate the small moments, those early morning cuddles with her son before they started their day, the quiet evenings where they would read stories together, the moments when she could sit back and watch him play, knowing that she was building something solid for their future. And then, one day, as she sat at her desk, reviewing a report for work, her son came running into her office, his face lighting up as he shouted, "Mommy! Look what I made." He held up a piece of paper with a drawing of a sun, a tree, and a smiling stick figure. "It's you, Mommy." She smiled as she took the drawing from him, her heart swelling with love. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You're so talented," she said, kissing the top of his head. "Thank you for making it for me." In that moment, she realized something important. It wasn't just about the job or the paycheck. It was about the love and connection she had with her son. The fact that she was able to provide for him, to show him through her actions that anything was possible, was the most rewarding part of all. It didn't matter that she sometimes felt overwhelmed or unsure of herself. What mattered was that she was there for him, that she was giving him the best life she could, in every way possible. As the weeks turned into months, she began to feel more settled into her role. both as a mother and as a professional. Her confidence grew, and she realized that she didn't have to be perfect. It was okay to make mistakes, to have bad days, to struggle sometimes. What mattered was that she kept going, that she showed up every day, both for her son and for herself. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, she was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her tea and looking over her notes for the next day. Her son, who had been playing quietly in the corner, suddenly looked up at her and said, "Mommy, I'm proud of you." Her heart stopped for a moment. "What did you say, sweetie?" He smiled, his eyes shining with sincerity. "I'm proud of you for working so hard. You always make sure we're okay." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she pulled him into a hug. "I'm proud of you too," she whispered. "You make me so proud every day." In that moment, she realized that her son had already learned the most important lesson she could teach him. It wasn't about the job or the success, it was about the love, the effort, and the dedication that went into everything she did. It was about showing him that no matter what challenges life threw their way, they could face them together. She had almost lost the job because of the challenges of motherhood. But instead, she had gained something far more valuable. She had gained the strength to balance both parts of her life and the knowledge that she was doing everything she could to create a better future for her family. As she looked at her son, his small hand resting in hers, she knew that she had made the right choice. The path wasn't always easy, and there were still difficult days ahead, but they were moving forward together. She wasn't just working for a paycheck, she was working for a life, a future, and a family that meant everything to her. And as they sat together that evening, her son's words echoed in her mind, "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple as they were, held all the meaning she needed. Because in the end, it wasn't about the giggles, the mistakes, or the setbacks. It was about the love they shared and the knowledge that, no matter what, they would always have each other.